Okay, so starting off with your area with polar coordinates under a single curve. So again, this scenario, single curve, meaning it's only governed by one polar equation. So most likely it's single curve because most of the equations coming from your polar coordinates are in the curve format. So puro siya curve. Okay. So if we're going to look for the area, let's say this shaded area in the green part. Okay, so what we need to know is we're going to determine this using the area of, I think it's the sector area, so if you're going to be applying this through the geometry, katong area of polygons. So if you have a sector, so I think this is 1/2 r theta squared. So I forgot the exact solution, but it's coming from the sector area of this one. Coming from a portion of your circle. So for example, this one is your circle, then you're only interested in finding the area of this particular region. So I think there's a formula for that one in your geometry. So I think that's 1/2 r squared. I forgot the exact formula. Basta this is where the formula came from. Okay, so 1/2 r squared, 1/2 r squared and d theta. So of course your r here, the r in the formula is the one touching the equation. R equals something. Okay, so whatever the equation is touching, that will be your r equation, or the line touch, or the curve presented on the graph. That will be your r equation. Now for the area for you to be solving is that will be the area bounded by a certain angle. So what we have discussed in the previous meeting was we look for the different points starting from 0 going to 2 pi. Diba? So for example, our point is somewhere in the pi over 2, then going towards a certain angle again. So that will be your limits of integration from alpha to beta. So our limits of integration is in the angular format. And take note, since we are dealing with polar coordinates, we'll be dealing with the radian mode in your calculator. All right. So 1/2 r squared d theta. Then the limits is from alpha to beta. That will be from a certain angular point going to another angular point. So for us to appreciate, so let's try to solve first this area. So determine the area of the inner loop. So inner loop of r equals 2 plus 4 cosine theta. So let's try to solve it in a way nga makakuha mo 1.0. So you may write table, mode table. So mode, and then table, and then 7, diba? That's 7. Mode 7. So again, don't forget to make your make your setup into radian mode. So I think that's shift setup and then rad for you to be able to convert your degrees mode into the radian mode. So mode table 7, so again our f of x equals something. So that will be 2 plus 4 cosine alpha x. And again, our starting value is 0. And then n value is 2 pi. So n value is equal to 2 pi. And then our step is pi over 6. So step equals pi over 6. So what will appear in your calculator again is x on the left side. That will be the different values for your angle. And then 0, then pi over 6, pi over 3, pi over 2. So for a while, kinanawag. Okay, so going back to the discussion, so pi over 2 and then na-distract ko da. Pasensya kaya. And then 5 pi over 6, then pi, and then 7 pi over 6, 4 pi over 3, 3 pi over 2, then pwede magdimasud. Kila. 6, and then 5.4641, and then 4, 2, 0, negative 1.464, negative 2, negative 1.464, 0, 2, 4, 5.4641, then back to 6 for 2 pi. So if you have presented in this manner, so that's one way of presenting your solution during the final exam. And then we're going to graph this one. So starting with 6. So let's say our 6 is at this point here. So ato lang i-adjust lang. And then let's say 5 is at somewhere at this point. And then 4. Dali niya 4 day. So 4, then 2. And then 0 for 2 pi over 3. And then 5 over 6 is again negative 1.46 or 1.5. So let's say again, if you have a negative value, we're going to make it opposite. So let's say this is 1.46. So since it's negative, it will be on the other side. So let's say at this point here. Then 2 pi is 2. So then negative 2. So again on the other side, that will be this point here. Then 1.5 is the same, negative. So starting with this point, then going towards the opposite sides because it's negative. So this is the point here. And then 0. And then for 3 pi over 2, that will be 2. And then 4 for 5 pi over 3. And then 5 point something, then 6. So ato lang siyang iatbang. So if you try to draw the figure, so again starting from 0, then going towards so let's say muna siya inyong graph. All right. So if you have this portion here, so that's one big mark in your solution. Because again, if the graph magically appeared and then especially there's no points present in your solution, so I might not consider your answer if the graph is wala siya kanang backup solution or let's say method. So again, even though you're using your calculator at this point, So if you don't have any evidence that you have provided your solution with this method, so again, I might not consider your answer. Okay, so since we are determining the area of the inner loop, so the inner loop that the problem is referring to is this portion here. Okay, so that will be the inner loop. So the drawing is muna siyang drawing made by Desmos. So medyo nindot lang yung graph because again it's an online graphing calculator. Okay, so let's try to solve now this particular point here. So again, this is the inner loop that we need to determine. Excuse me. So again, before we try to solve this one, we're going to write the formula first. Area equals 1/2 r squared d theta from alpha to beta angle. So since 1/2 is constant, so we can take this one outside the equation. And then we can write the equation directly because we are only dealing with one curve. So that will be 2 plus 4 cosine theta. And then d theta. So our problem here is how we're going to excuse is that how we're going to determine the angle of alpha going to the beta portion. So muna siya nga to ang problem karon. So we don't know which angle we're going to use going towards the anong inner loop ra ang i-consider, di ba? Okay, so so if you have your points in your calculator, so again the inner loop started at this point, di ba, katong 0 value, and then natay another point in your 11 pi over 6, di ba? Adi siya 11 pi over 6 but dire sa inyohang dire. Another point here, another point here, then another point on this one. So that will be the coverage of your inner loop. So our 0 is the value of 2 pi over 3, and then it close again on 0 sa 4 pi over 3 nga value, diba? So if we refer it again on the previous slide, 2 pi over 3 is 0, and then 4 pi over 3 is 0. So meaning that will be the start of the inner loop, diba? Then going back to the 0 again to close the inner loop, that is 4 pi over 3. So nagets na ninyo? Diba? So muna siya ang starting sa kuan. Then at this point, ni mo siya inner loop starting from 2 pi over 3 because that's 0. Then it made an inner loop. And going back to 0 again. So that will be the coverage of the angle. Starting from 2 pi, meaning starting from 0, then going towards again back to 0 because that's the enclosed inner loop. And that 0 value is from 2/3 going towards 4 pi over 3. So 2/3 pi and 4/3 pi. So meaning our alpha and beta will be from so this is 1/2, and then from 2 pi over 3 because it's a much smaller value compared to 4 pi over 3, so that's why it's on the lower limit. And then 2 plus 4 cosine theta d theta. Okay, so once you have this solution, or once you have this equation, So you can input it in your calculator. So again, take note that you need to have this equation. So di ba, wala na mong ipangayo sa step-by-step derivation sa inyong equation because you can now use your calculator. Okay, so again, if you have this equation and then your next answer is your kanang sa inyong calculator na, so it is accepted because you presented this equation. But for example, you have this formula and then you gave directly the answer, so dili po siya makredit, diba? Kay the aim at this point is for you to establish the equations in the application. Diba? So if you have established this equation, so at this point you may now use the calculator to solve for the answer. So di ba, ang ipangayo sa inyo is the solutions coming from the graph and then the equation right before using the calculator. So murang ipangayo sa inyo, no more, no less. Yeah, I think ibawan na sad mo og unsa ang buhaton para makakuha og big score. Okay, so again, if you input this in your calculator, so since this one is in theta, so ako lang isawata kay para kita ninyo. So this will be 1/2 and then 4 pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, then this is 2 plus 4 alpha x, and then dx. Then muna siya inyong area. So let's try to wait for the answer. Kibawan ako sa iko nga na. It's it's squared. Na. Squared, squared, and then squared. So the answer is 2.17. So ano lang ipangayo sa inyo sa other half of the semester. So I think this is for most of the applications problems during the final exam. It will be on test 2. So at least gamay ra gipangayo sa test 2, di ba? Puro applications, but again, given that you provide the necessary solutions going towards the final answer. So solutions for the graph, so kani siya, kanilang solution, and then for your area part, or let's say volume, whatever topic that you're going to solve later on, is you provide the solutions before you use the calculator. Ano lang, very simple. So I hope you understand that where the limits of integration is coming from. Diba? So nag-guess na ninyo kung asa to dapit gikan ng limits of integration. So gikan to dire. So let's go back. So gikan to dire sa, again, if you graph your equation, I think you can understand that the start of the inner loop is from 2/3, diba? Again, as per formula, diba? It's from, so as per formula, muna siya tong formula, diba? From alpha, spanning going towards beta. So muna siya tong ibuhat dire. So let's say our alpha here, then imo siya graph going towards 4 pi over 3. So muna siya ang limits of integration. So na guess ra kuan pwede ra siya again as what I have told as what I have told you earlier, pwede ra siya kanira nga kuan nga equation ang ipakita sa application and then directly use the calculator. So dili na so not necessarily na mangayo og ng solutions for integration. Okay, we are on the application part lang. Basta as long as you provide the equation first before using the calculator. Yeah, dapat sakto ang equation na. Okay, if di sakto ang equation, yeah, you got the correct answer. So, kana medyo may bong sa tang ano correct ang inyong answer and then wrong ang equation presented on paper. So, muna siya for test 2. So, you may directly use the calculator provided that you give the equation first before using the calculator. And then I think for part 1, since the coverage is from start to finish, so part 1 will be more on the integration process. So mabalik ta sa integrals. I think sa part 1, dito mo mag-show og solution jud sa integration techniques. But for application, kaning area, volume, so on and so forth, so you can provide the solution and then, you can provide the equation, then use the calculator to get the answer. Okay, the important part in the application topics is for you to establish the equations. Diba? Okay, I think difficult na daan ang pag-establish sa equation. Diba? Ang pag-graph pa lang daan, difficult na, and then pag-establish sa equation is difficult also if you don't understand the concept for each topic. Muna siya for so questions pa? Questions? So wala na yung question? Okay, so let's proceed. So this is the solution. So 2.174. Okay, so let's step up our understanding a bit. So let's try to solve equations under two curves. And this one is pretty simple because you are using the same equation, but since it is bounded by two curves now, so you're just going to subtract the outer sector or the outer equation with the inner equation. So ganina is purely green man to tanan, di ba? But now is we're only interested with this equation now, kanina ka green part. And it is bounded now by two polar equations. So outer, so marasya ka ng kuhan, di ba? So you're going to solve first the whole equation. That will, let's say this is governed by r sub the outer polar equation, and then you're going to subtract the inner polar equation. And what is left is the portion kanang green part, di ba? So the entire, so if we try to understand this completely, so maramog ka ng kuan, the entire sector minus the inner sector, that will give you the remaining area to be solved for. So that's why it's the same concept. It's 1/2 r squared theta still, but since you are going to have two curves, so duha pod kabok inyong 1/2 r squared theta. So area is equal to 1/2 r squared theta on the outer part minus 1/2 r squared theta d theta in the inner part, diba? And then simplifying the equation, that's why you have 1/2 r outer squared r inner squared d theta from alpha to beta. So muna siya. Okay, so let's start solving. Oops. Na-reveal na nun. Okay, so let's start first with graphing your r equals 3 plus 2 sine theta. So again, mode table, mode 7. So for my calculator, it's 7. So f of x equals 3 plus 2 sine alpha x. And then start is 0 and is 2 pi. And then your step value, that will be the interval, will be equal to pi over 6. Okay, so for r over 2, so you may solve this directly because this one is a circle. So dito na siya. 2 to r equals 2 man siya. So puro siya 2 tanan, di ba? Radially. So 2 na siya ang kuan. So that will be for r equals 2. Okay. So for your r plus 2 sine alpha x, so start is 0, then 2 pi, and then pi over 6. So starting again with the x values first, and then on the right side, that will be f of x. So 0, pi over 6, pi over 3, pi over 2, 2/3 pi, 5 over 6 pi. Okay, so 3, then 4, 4.732, then 5, then 4.732, 4, 3, 2, then 1.2679, 1, 1.2679, and then 2. Then going back to 3 for 2 pi. So 3 first, and then 4.7, 4 pa day. 4, then 4.7, and then 5, and then 4.7, and then going back to 4, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1.26, that will be 1.3, approximately 1.3, and then 1, and then 1.3 again, and then going back to 2, then 3. Okay, so this will be your second graph. So okay, so this one is the equation for r equals 3 plus 2 sine theta. The circle one is r equals 2. So we need to determine the area that lies inside r plus 3. 3 equals r equals 3 plus 2 sine theta, and then outside r equals 2. So meaning inside r equals 3 plus 2 sine theta, then outside r equals 2. So this is the area that it is talking about. So ato lang i-change color. So muna siya nga area. So inside, r equals 3 plus 2 sine theta, but outside, r equals 2. So muna siya inyong okay, so if you're going to look at your graph, kung asa ni intercept or kung asa ni start ang inyong kuan, so it is starting at this point, diba? So 11 pi over 6, that is the two distance or the points of intersection between the two curves. And then ending on the other side, which is also 2, 7 pi over 6. Diba? So again, we are going to measure it counterclockwise, diba? Because that is the positive rotation of angles. Okay, so for the graph, it is, so muna siya ang graph created by Desmos. So ato lang i-correct later on the next slides. Okay. Okay, so again, since we're going to measure counterclockwise, so this one is our alpha, then this one is our beta. But take note, alpha must be less than, alpha must be less than beta, diba? And looking at the angles, 11 pi is greater than 7 pi over 6. So how are we going to do about 11 pi over 6? In such a manner nga mas smaller siya compared to the beta angle. So for us to be able to let alpha be smaller than beta, so we're going to make this as the negative counterpart, diba? So if this one is 11 pi over 6, so this is, so if you measure this from the x-axis using using clockwise direction, so this becomes negative pi over 6, diba? So that will be the negative counterpart of 11 pi over 6. So instead of 11 pi over 6, we'll be going to use negative pi over 6 as your alpha value for us to be able to follow the condition that alpha must be lesser than the beta angle. So again, take note that the lower limit, diba? It's called lower limit because it is much less value. It's a lesser value compared to the beta angle. Diba? That's why it's called lower limit. So it doesn't make sense if the lower limit is bigger than the upper limit. So that's why we took the negative counterpart of 11 pi over 6 for alpha to be smaller value. Okay? So again, this is the area to be solved for. So ako lang yana para madali ito ang drawing. Ako lang yana, ikuris-kuris lang ako. So again, our alpha is equal to negative pi over 6, or originally that will be 11 pi over 6, but we took the negative, again, negative counterpart of 11 pi over 6, and then beta is equal to 7 pi over 6. So another way to solve this one is for you to equate the two equations. Diba? So since you have two equations presented, so you may use the process where you need to determine where you need to get the points of intersection of the two equations. So meaning na you're going to equate the two equations. So 3 plus 2 sine theta, and then r is equal to 2. So incorporating r in the first equation, let's say, so you're going to have 2 equals 3 plus 2 sine theta. And then you're going to have, let's say we're going to shift it para the sine function is on the left side. So 2 sine theta is equal to 2 minus 3. Then you have sine 2 sine theta is equal to negative 1. And then sine theta is equal to negative 1/2. And then you get the theta. So arc sine theta of negative 1/2, that will be your angle. So arc sine negative 1/2 okay, so as you can see, that will be negative 1/6 pi, diba? That will be for the first equation. Okay, so for the counterpart of, so since you're only able to solve one, so I think there's a topic in your trigonometry class, murag kanang pairing up of angles. So the pair of negative 1/6 pi is 7 pi over 6. So basta na siya topic kana dito sa inyong kuan wherein it's pairing up angles katong sa kalimot kung sa nga topic, basta try to look it up online lang. Pairing up of angles. Okay, so this is another way of determining your points, your alpha and beta through the points of intersection. Pero para nako, ang best way and mas ma-verify siya even more because sa kanilang method, because na may graph, then napo jay tabular method na maka-verify na end-to-end ang iyang pag-close, di ba? So at least kana siya is klarong-klaro jud kayo niya. You don't have to go through the complicated stuff of equating two equations and then getting the points of intersection. So much better siguro if you're going to use the tabular method, and then from the values presented in the table, dito mo magbase sa inyo ang alpha and beta para dili kay lisod. Okay? So now we are now ready to solve the equation. So that will be alpha is equal to 1/2, and then r outer squared minus r inner squared d theta from alpha to beta. So again, our alpha to beta is from these points, diba? Counterclockwise direction. So 11 pi over 6 or negative pi over 6, and then going to 7 pi over 6. So we're going to have negative pi over 6. So again, take note, we're not using 11 pi over 6 because alpha should be lesser than the upper limit. And then 7 pi over 6, and then 1/2. So you may take 1/2 outside. So let me try to adjust this one. Okay, so outer is the red graph governed by 3 plus 2 sine theta. So 3 plus 2 sine theta squared, and then minus the inner equation, which is the blue one, governed by r equals 2. So 2 squared. And then d theta. So at this point, you may now use your calculator. Pero medyo dugay-dugay na siya ang pag-process because you are dealing with squared functions. So if you're going to try to plug it in your calculator, so since the calculator doesn't have brackets, so inyong pag-input ani is 1/2, and then 7 pi over 6, negative pi over 6. So parenthesis, and then parenthesis for the outer r first, 3 plus 2 sine, and then alpha x, then another parenthesis, squared, minus 2 squared, then another parenthesis, dx. So outer, so sakto na siya. So that's how you plug it in your calculator. So the answer is 24.19 for the area that lies inside 3 plus 2 sine theta and r equals 2. Okay, so as for your question earlier, negatives, yeah. So I'm not sure if makorek siya if we're going to may mo siyang negative because there's no negative area ra ba? So I get your point that you're going to use the property wherein may mo siyang negative, di ba? Pero i-try lang if it gives the same answer, but I think it doesn't give the same answer because if you're going to shift the kuan, i-try lang ato i-try be. So atong i-try if same bang answer. So may mo siyang negative, and then the upper limit is now 11 pi over 6. Then lower limit is 7 pi over 6. So basin dugay ang pag-process sa calculator kay 3 plus 2 sine alpha x squared and minus sa 4 para makatabang mo sa calculator. Patatanawon if same bag answer. Magdili siya the same. Dili siya same mag answer. So I think the explanation there nga no dili siya the same is because if you're going to draw siguro the boundaries of your limits, so medyo mausab siya, di ba? So probably it is solving the lower part na sa inyo ang graph, dili na kaning inner area. So sige lang, makita man na later on sa next examples. Okay, so this is the example. So this is what I'm talking about earlier. So your sine theta equals negative 1/2. Na siya ay pair nga angle sa answer. So I just forgot on sa itong topic in your trigo. Basta if you're going to solve angles, na siya ay pair ang inyong answer jud. So even though that you're getting one arc sine value for this one, let's say negative pi over 6. So na siya ay counterpart a pair up. Okay, so muna siya ang iyong answer. So this is the manual derivation, I mean the manual integration of your answer. So if you want to manually integrate, pwede sa din nyo i-integrate lang even further such that you want to help your calculator lang at up until this point. Pwede lagi siya mo deal with squared units. So boundary to boundary na siya, di ba? Counterclockwise direction. From the first boundary going towards the second boundary. Okay, so in the third example, the same equations, but this time we're going to solve the area outside r equals 3 plus 2 sine theta, and then inside r equals 2. So outside, so it is this area that the problem is talking about, outside the red graph, but inside the circle. So that will be the graph. So again, our points, so always remember that the points of, I mean the limits of integration is in the counterclockwise direction. So meaning this is from this point going towards this point here, counterclockwise direction. So since we all know that this is 7 pi over 6 going towards 11 pi over 6, so it's safe to say that our alpha and beta are these angles. So alpha, then moving counterclockwise towards the next limit, this is the beta angle. So alpha, I mean the area is equal to alpha to beta, 1/2 r outer squared minus r inner squared d theta. So take note that from the origin, the outer graph will be the blue one, the inner graph will be the red one. Diba? So if you reach out to the outer portion first, that will be the blue graph. Then the inner graph is the red graph. So this becomes 1/2 and then 7 pi over 6 going to 11 pi over 6. So our outer again is the 2 graph, the blue graph, minus 3 plus 2 sine theta squared d theta. So if you're going to plug this in your calculator, 1/2, then 11 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6. So again, in the calculator, there's no bracket, so 2 squared, or you may use 4 to help your calculator a bit. Then 3 plus 2 sine alpha x squared, then parenthesis balik, then dx. And that will be your area. Okay, so the area is 2.19. So this is what the area that we solved earlier. If we try to reverse I mean if you use the identity, di ba? Because if you are declaring it, so I think ang area to be covered will be determined by the limits, di ba? So starting from 7 pi going to 11 pi over 6, so meaning this is the area that is only being solved by the equation or by the limits of integration. Okay, so again, you may be only up until this point, then use your calculator to solve for the value of the area. So pwede ra dili na kita mo kuan. Okay, so this is the solution. Okay, so let's go to the last example. So it's the same graph, but this time is we're going to be solving the area that is both inside r equals 3 plus 2 sine theta and r equals 2. So since both are inside, so inside of the red graph and inside of the blue graph, so this is the area that is talking about. So muna siya nga area. So how do we solve that green area? So there are two methods. So you may start off by solving the area of the entire red graph, di ba? Meaning you're going to solve it first, isolated as one curve only. So meaning you're going to solve the area of the entire red graph, and then we're going to subtract it with what we have solved earlier, katong 24.19, the area the area outside r equals 2 but inside r equals 3 plus 2 sine theta. So if in drawing a term, so ano inyong graph diri ana atong minusan og ani nga portion, di ba? Muna mahimo siyang basta makagets na siguro mo ana. Di ba? So the entire graph minus what we have solved in example number 2 will give us the area inside the red and blue graph. So the other method is for you to determine the area of the circle and then minus what we have solved previously in example number 3. So kaning murag anang a portion, di ba? So sa number 3 nga problem. And then what is left is atong ma-solve sa kaning murag ana nga puan. Asa murag same sa babaw. Kaso murag kidney ana. So that's how you solve this problem. So I'm not going to go into the details, but muna siya ang pag-solve. Solution number 1 is area of the circle and then minus from the area from example number 3, or the area of the limacon, that is the area of the blue graph, minus the area from what we have solved from example number 2. That will be the same area as the other solution. So medyo kuan lang siya. Medyo nadali lang ta ani nga part because we already solved examples 2 and 3. So it so happened that in example number 4, so katong inner area ang gipangayo, and since we have known data for from examples 2 and 3, so we can solve immediately your example number 4. So for example, in the exam, mo na siyang gihatag, so medyo taas-taas na inyong solution, di ba? So you're going to solve first for the area of the circle if you're going to use example number 1. Then the next is you're going to solve for the area of the outer portion of the circle. Then you get 2.19. And then you subtract it with the area of the circle. Then for example number 2, for solution number 2, so solve first using the area of the limacon, that will be the blue graph. And then you solve again the area bounded by the blue and the red graph. Then after solving the area, so i-subtract mo from the area the limakon, and that will be your answer again. All right. So do you have questions or clarifications so far regarding this topic? No. Nag-lunch na mo? Okay, so I think there's no question. So the problem set is up in the Canvas class na to, and then the deadline for which is still 1 week na. 1 week para makasabot sad mo sa ginsa ninyo pag-solve. So kaya sad mo pagpanik-panik sa dog kansad pagpanik og answer sa inyong problem set na you're going to create it 2 days before the deadline. So kana pwede siguro 1 problem per day ana para masabtan sa ninyo ang process. Alright? So if you don't have any more questions, so probably I'll upload the recording on a later date lang siguro. Okay, para masabtan og nabay nakakuan. So I'll try to upload it during the deadline lang siguro sa inyong problem set. Okay, so if there's no question, so